and Americans' personal information. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
The senator from Vermont.
Madam President, while the distinguished senator from Nebraska is still on the floor, I found much to agree with her in her comments, and I hope after we reintroduce the Personal Data Privacy and Security Act that she may want to become a co-sponsor of it. This would better protect Americans from the growing threats of data breaches and identity theft. I mean, last year, according to Verizon's report, there were more than 600 publicly disclosed data breaches all over the country. The recent breach of Target involved debit and credit cards, data of as many as 40 million customers. Now, that's a reminder that developing a comprehensive national strategy to protect data privacy and cybersecurity remains one of the most challenging and important issues facing our nation. We've, in the Personal Data Privacy and Security Act, this better protects Americans. And I do thank Senators Franken and Schumer and Blumenthal for co-sponsoring it. You know, I first introduced this bill 9 years ago. I thought we'd bring urgently needed data privacy reforms to the American people. At that time, it was the threat to American people are nowhere near as extensive as it is today, from everything from when you buy gasoline to shop. The Judiciary Committee has favorably reported this bill. Republicans and Democrats joined together numerous times, but it's languished on the Senate calendar. And let me just point out some of the things we found on the dangers to Americans' privacy and American prosperity and national security. According to the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse, more than 662 million records have been involved in data security breaches since 2005. Not a dozen, 662 million records. As I mentioned before, Verizon's 2013 data breach investigation, 600 publicly disclosed data breaches. These are just the ones that are publicly disclosed. Now, the Personal Data Privacy and Security Act requires companies to have databases with sensitive personal information on Americans, establish and implement data privacy and security programs. The bill would also establish a single nationwide standard for data breach notification. It require notice to consumers when their sensitive personal information has been compromised. It provide for tough criminal penalties for anyone who would intentionally and willfully conceal the fact that a data breach has occurred. That breach causes economic damage to consumers. This requirement to have to publicly disclose it is also going to make companies want to have far better security than many have now. And protecting the privacy rights is of critical importance to all of us, regardless of party or ideology. And I hope that all senators will join with this. I'd ask consent that a copy of the bill be included in the record at the completion of my statement.
Without objection.
Now, Madam President, let me speak, if I might, for a few minutes on a personal matter. It's about a dear friend of mine, Barry Meyer. And I want to recognize his remarkable career. He's retiring this month from Warner Brothers after 42 years with the company. We know that Warner Brothers is one of America's most legendary entertainment companies. It's a household name for families around the nation. And I think of the times when I've walked through their grounds with Barry Meyer and had him tell about coming there as a young lawyer and just talking about the history of the company until he moved to the point where he was leading the company. And the pride and the sense of history that he showed is remarkable. It is gratifying to see somebody who takes such pride in his work. Now, we've all heard of Warner Brothers, but far fewer Americans have heard of the man behind the magic for the past 14 years. It's a testament to his leadership as chairman and CEO that he allowed the company and his properties to shine in the spotlight. He wanted that to be the spotlight, not a spotlight on himself. Despite his quiet style, Barry has stood at the forefront of pop culture during his tenure at Warner Brothers. Think of movies like Harry Potter and The Big Bang Theory and The Blind Side, the Dark Knight trilogy. They made people laugh or cry or simply marvel at the memorable productions that have sprung from his tenure at this company. Now, I'd also note that as a lifelong Batman fan, I've had the opportunity to see two of Barry's productions from the inside while they were filming. And I can speak firsthand to the culture he fostered at Warner Brothers that allowed creativity to flourish. It brought people together to work, bring their talents and their best talents to flourish. He first joined Warner Brothers in 1971, before I was in the Senate, I might add, as Director of Business Affairs for the television division. In 1999, he became Chairman and CEO. And his steady leadership of the company came at a time when the entertainment industry is beginning to face new challenges. They had the rise of the Internet, but they also had the tremendous challenge of online piracy. Well, he pushed the company to innovate, but he also became an important voice about the impact that online piracy has on our economy and on industries that are a vibrant part of American life. And his counsel has been invaluable to me as Congress has looked for solutions to address this. He's always been available to give advice, and solid advice based on knowledge, not on emotion. Now, Warner Brothers has been one of the world's most successful entertainment companies under Barry's tenure. But he's also focused on humanitarian and charitable pursuits. He's a member of the Board of Directors for Human Rights Watch and the Advisory Board of the National Museum of American History here at the Smithsonian. But he's also recognized in 2006 with the American Jewish Committee's Dorothy and Cheryl Corrin Human Relations Award for his humanitarian efforts. I also know that when he was given this award, his request was, when they were speaking at the award, don't praise him. Praise things of importance to all Americans. It is typical of the person. And among these efforts was joining with his wife, Wendy, to establish scholarships at the University of Southern California to support students who have been in foster care. Now, Barry and Wendy have wonderful children and grandchildren. They have a loving family with them. If you go in their home, you can see this is a home someone lives in. And children come, and grandchildren come, and they have a place to play. They have that family. But what they have done is to help those who have not had that advantage, who have been in foster care. Now, my wife, Marcel, and I have gotten to know Barry and Wendy. They've been with us, together with us in Vermont, here in Washington, and out in California. And some people who might have the position he does would make sure everybody knows that here they are, this important person. Not so with either one of them. They're most down-to-earth, quiet, but when we get together, we pick up the conversation we'd had months before. And you feel like you're a member of the family. So this remarkable couple are going to be working in other endeavors. There's been some great articles about Barry as he looks back on his career, the work he's done to make sure the hands of the company with his successor are in good hands. But as he begins this next chapter of his life, I wish Barry all the best. I congratulate him on a remarkable career. Warner Brothers in the entertainment industry is not going to be quite the same without him, but he leaves behind a legacy, an example for the next generation to follow. I know his successor. I wish Kevin the very best in following him. I'd also ask unanimous consent that a December 29, 2013 article from the Wrap, which my daughter Alicia showed me, be included in the record at this point.
Without objection.
And Madam President, I know I look forward to the next time Marcel and I have an opportunity to be with Barry and Wendy. And while they may be retired, neither one of them are going to be sitting back doing nothing. I know them too well for that. With that, Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Alexander.
possible later today in the Senate we will see a procedural vote on extending unemployment insurance benefits. The Senate yesterday agreeing to move forward with debate on the legislation. It passed yesterday by a 60-37 vote. Those benefits expired at the end of 2013. The proposed legislation in the Senate would extend them for 3 months through March of this year. Meanwhile, today marks the 50th anniversary of Lyndon Baines Johnson's War on Poverty. He announced it 50 years ago today, and a number of speeches both on the House and Senate side, and news conference as well, particularly Democrats tying it into efforts to pass the unemployment insurance benefits bill. We expect Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa later this afternoon to have what's being called a major speech on the War on Poverty, marking the 50th anniversary, and we'll have that live, of course, here on C-SPAN. The House's end, they have a short legislative day today as they begin the second session of the 113th Congress. They'll have debate on a couple of bills, gavel out about 2 o'clock or so, and return for votes in the mid-afternoon. You can follow the House on C-SPAN. It's possible later today in the Senate we'll see another procedural vote on extending unemployment insurance benefits. The Senate yesterday voting to move forward with the legislation. That vote 60 to 37. All Democrats voted in favor of moving forward, and 6 Republicans supporting that as well. And following that vote, a couple of the Republican senators who voted in favor of moving forward came to the Senate floor for a discussion on their reasons behind that. We'll show that to you as this quorum call continues in the U.S. Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to talk about an amendment that I will seek to offer on the pending bill, Amendment number 2603. We all sympathize with those who are struggling to find work in a difficult economy, and I want to see people get back to work. Certainly, a short-term extension for those who are relying on unemployment insurance, if it's paid for, will allow a transition for those who are out of work to do what we need to do most in this chamber and to give them an opportunity to get a good-paying job. The focus in this chamber, most of all, needs to be on enacting pro-growth policies that will encourage both small and large businesses to thrive and grow in our economy and to create jobs. I have voted today to begin debate on the legislation to provide a temporary extension of unemployment insurance. And I voted to begin this debate because I believe that both sides of the aisle can find a way to grant this temporary extension to those who are struggling to find work in this difficult economy while making sure that we don't add to the $17 trillion of debt that also threatens our country and our economy. And I continue to believe that any temporary extension in a long-term unemployment benefits should be paid for in a responsible manner. So I have introduced an amendment, AOT Amendment 2603. I think it's an amendment that makes a ton of sense. And let me tell you what this amendment does. This amendment pays for the 3-month extension of unemployment insurance. It fixes the unfair cut to military cost of living that was just enacted in the budget that I voted against because I felt that this was unfair to those who have served in our military and were singled out for cuts to their retirement benefits, unlike anyone else, including, by the way, those who were retired because they had a medical retirement. In other words, those that many of us, I know that the President has visited, Walter Reed, as have I, those who have lost arms, legs, they receive a medical retirement, and their cost of living was cut under this budget as well. So my amendment not only would pay for this temporary unemployment insurance for those who are struggling to find work, to give them a transition, to get them back to work, but it would also pay for to fix and reverse this unfair cut in military retirement benefits to their cost of living increase, those who, by the way, have served, many have served multiple tours for our country and have sacrificed a tremendous amount because they've moved around, because they have served both, many of them in Iraq and Afghanistan, on behalf of our country. And it would also, in addition to that, give $7 billion to reducing our deficit. And the way I pay for this is to close, to fix an egregious problem in our tax code. It's a problem that was identified by the Treasury IG. It is frankly egregious. This is a problem in our tax code that has allowed illegal immigrants, has allowed people who are claiming a tax credit, a refundable tax credit for children who shouldn't be entitled to it. Many of these children don't even live in the United States of America or may not even exist. Why? Because when this refundable tax credit, someone claims it, they don't have to put a Social Security number for the child. This is based on a Treasury IG report that identified this problem, and this amendment, this simple fix that would require a Social Security number with anyone who is claiming the additional child tax credit on their tax return is estimated to save $20 billion over the next 10 years. So paying for fixing the retirement cuts of the cost of living increase that went to those who have sacrificed so much for our country, paying for a temporary unemployment insurance extension for those who are struggling to find work, reducing our deficit by $7 billion over 10 years, all three of those things done by fixing an egregious problem in our tax code. The audit of the Treasury IG in 2011 reported that individuals who are not authorized to work in the United States of America received $4.2 billion by claiming this additional child tax credit. The audit found that the payment of federal funds through this tax benefit appears to provide an additional incentive for aliens to enter, reside, and work in the United States without authorization, which contradicts federal law and policy to remove such incentives. The audit was based upon an analysis of tax returns filed by persons with individual taxpayer identification numbers, which are issued to individuals who are required to have a taxpayer ID number for tax purposes, but are not eligible for a Social Security number because they're not authorized to work in the United States of America. Again, this saves $20 billion over the next 10 years. And let me just tell you how egregious this is. Here's some of the reports about this problem in our tax code. It's fraud. This is fraud that we're going to fix here. This is good government. We should fix this now, regardless. This $20 billion is money that should not be going out the door over 10 years. Here's some examples from Indiana. In fact, I just saw walk in the chamber one of my colleagues from Indiana, Senator Coates. In Indiana, a local television station found that an undocumented worker who was interviewed at his home in southern Indiana by a reporter admitted his address was used this year to file tax returns by 4 other undocumented workers who don't even live there. Those 4 workers claimed 20 children that live in one residence, and as a result, the IRS sent the illegal immigrants tax refunds totaling over $29,000. The local station has found that many undocumented workers are claiming tax credits for children who live in Mexico. Many children that don't even live in this country are claiming tax credits. They're being used by those committing fraud on the IRS to claim for tax credits even though they don't even live in the United States of America. An Indiana tax preparer who acted as a whistleblower to an Indiana news station said, "We've seen sometimes 10 or 12 dependents, most times nieces and nephews, on these tax reforms. The more you put on there, the more you get back." The whistleblower had thousands of examples. Another example from the whistleblower, we've got over a $10,000 refund for 9 nieces and nephews, he said, pointing to the words niece and nephew listed on the tax form 9 separate times. We're getting an $11,000 refund on this tax return. There's 7 nieces and nephews, he said, pointing to another set of documents. I can bring out stacks and stacks. It's just so easy. It's ridiculous. In North Carolina, investigators uncovered more than 1,000 tax returns linked to 8 addresses in North Carolina last May, with refunds worth more than $5 million. Investigators tied at least 17 tax returns totaling more than $62,000 in refunds to a Charlotte, North Carolina apartment one woman leased. At another apartment nearby, investigators discovered 153 returns valued at over $700,000 in returns, claiming fraudulently this tax credit because they did not have to list a Social Security number. Another address in the same apartment complex had 236 returns worth $1.1 million in refunds. At another Charlotte apartment complex, investigators traced 398 returns to 2 apartments totaling more than $1.9 million in additional child tax credits, with no guarantee that the children even existed or lived in the United States of America. Another North Carolina woman owned a tax preparation business. A search of that business and her home turned up more returns, dozens of uncashed U.S. Treasury checks, a FedEx box containing dozens of foreign birth certificates, and a notary public stamp and signature stamp listing her as a notary. That fraud case by the IRS...
Consent, the privilege of the floor be granted to Julius Ferlazzo of my staff for the pendency of this Congress.
Without objection.
Madam President, 50 years ago today, President Lyndon Johnson challenged a joint session of Congress and the American people to begin a war on poverty. Unfortunately, President Johnson said many Americans today live on the outskirts of hope. Our task, he said, is to help replace their despair with opportunity. Since President Johnson first issued that call, Congress and our nation have taken important steps to build and sustain a circle of protection around the most vulnerable in our society. That protection isn't as complete or as strong as it can and should be, but through programs like unemployment insurance, which we are considering this week in this Congress, we are more able to catch our neighbors when they fall and support them as they work to get back to their feet. Earlier this week, this Senate began debate on whether to extend emergency unemployment insurance for the 3,600 Delawareans and more than 1 million American job seekers whose benefits just expired. It is absolutely critical that we approve this extension. During this fragile but sustained economic recovery, unemployment insurance has been a critical lifeline, one that has prevented millions of unemployed Americans from slipping further from falling into poverty. In 2012, unemployment insurance kept 2.5 million Americans, including 600,000 children, out of poverty. That means without federal action to extend unemployment insurance, the nation's poverty rate would have been double what it was. And these numbers are for 2012, not the height of the recession. So let's be clear about what we're debating when we discuss an unemployment insurance extension. These are long-term benefits for jobless Americans who've been out of work through no fault of their own for more than 26 weeks. And when I say through no fault of their own, I mean it. You can't get benefits if you're fired for cause. And as you receive unemployment insurance benefits, you must diligently search for another job. So when we talk about the millions of long-term unemployed Americans, we're talking about folks who were laid off because of the recession, are fighting to get back on their feet, and rely on those benefits to keep their families afloat, to keep a roof over their head, food on the table, their families together, and sustain them as they continue looking for work. Yet 2 weeks ago, funding for long-term emergency unemployment insurance benefits ran out. That meant $300 less in weekly income for the average job seeker, and that meant $400 million left our economy in just the first week. In Delaware, it pulled $870,000 out of our economy. That's money that otherwise would be spent in local grocery stores and our markets. Now, one of the most vexing things I've heard in the debate over whether to continue these benefits is that they somehow incentivize people to not bother looking for jobs, to not be serious about their job search, that they instead lull able-bodied Americans into lives of dependency and despondency. Madam President, given the people I hear from, the people I meet with, the people I know in Delaware, that's not just absurd, it's, forgive me, offensive. And as President Obama said yesterday, it sells the American people short. I've met a lot of people in my years of public service. I've heard from and spoken with Delawareans up and down my state who are relying on unemployment benefits that they paid into when employed, and every one of them would trade a job for relying on unemployment insurance in a heartbeat. Let me share with you a few stories of Delawareans who've contacted me and who've shared just how hard this has been for them. Debbie from Middletown, Delaware, wrote to me that while she's been receiving unemployment benefits, she's applied to 156 jobs. She's been interviewed 3 times. She's 56. She has worked diligently since she was a teenager. She's worked hard. She's paid her taxes. She's paid into this unemployment insurance system practically her whole life. And yet now, when she needs it most, we failed to continue to provide this lifeline of support. Linda from Newark wrote to me that on just $258 a week, her family has barely been able to stay afloat. They're doing everything they can to keep up on their bills to stay current, but even with unemployment insurance, they've had to sell some of their family's treasured possessions and goods. She wrote to me, "This is no way for anyone to live. It's disheartening and it's difficult to stay motivated and to keep searching for work. And frankly," she said, "I'm thoroughly fed up with being categorized as someone who lives off the government by collecting unemployment benefits." Well, I agree with her, because frankly, Linda, you paid into these benefits for years. This is what it's there for. John from Frederica told me that he was laid off from the Dover Air Force Base, in part because of the sequester, and now depends on unemployment benefits while he continues diligently searching for another job. This is a man who is a Navy veteran, was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for our country. And yet right now, because of the partisan gridlock in this Congress, we're not there for him and his family. Madam President, the millions of Americans, like Debbie, Linda, and John in Delaware, face a really tough job market. Nationally, for every available job, there are 3 job seekers. And the longer someone remains unemployed, the harder it becomes for them to find work. The more their skills are out of date, the more difficult the search becomes, and the more they need our support to sustain that job search. I've seen these effects up close and personally in Delaware. In my 3 years as a senator, I've hosted 16 different job fairs to connect Delawareans looking for work with employers looking to hire. And I've been honored to partner with Senator Carper and Congressman Carney in hosting these job fairs. In fact, we're hosting another one in our state capital, Dover, in just a few weeks. When you listen to unemployed Delawareans and listen to them talk about their struggle, about how hard it is to make ends meet and to keep searching for a job, you get a sense of how important these benefits are for their survival, for their families. And you get a sense of how much more we can and should be doing to tackle and deal with long-term unemployment in America. As poverty of opportunity and hope afflicts too many of our communities and darkens the lives of too many of our neighbors, let us not suffer in this chamber from a poverty of imagination, determination, and ambition. On this issue, which is so fundamental to who we are as a nation and to our service in this body, we cannot give in to complacency and apathy. Fighting poverty is hard, and adapting our economy to the realities of the new era is a challenge we've struggled with for more than a generation. Yet figuring out how to revitalize an economy whose growth is strong and equitable, one that's dynamic and creative and competitive, but also has a broad middle class, provides security for working families and leaves no one behind, an economy that invests in the dreams and aspirations of every child. Building that economy is surely one of the most urgent and difficult challenges we here face. And doing so requires that we put aside our personal politics and come together in areas where until recently there's been a broad and bipartisan consensus. I now hear some of my Republican colleagues talk on this floor about the war on poverty 50 years later as having been an abject failure. They make sweeping indictments on government action, putting small government ideology ahead of the shared national goal of fighting poverty. But this perspective misses the point. The original war on poverty was made up of a lot of programs, energetic initiatives that worked at every level of government, some that failed, but many others that through steady and determined bipartisan work and steady improvement and refinement over the years have become critical, central, widely valued strands that hold together our social safety net. Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, food stamps, unemployment insurance, all of these programs are valued and hold American families together and sustain American job seekers. Bipartisan leaders across the decades have reaffirmed the importance and value of these programs time and time again. And these programs, let's remember, are about so much more than lifting people out of poverty. They're also about keeping people out of poverty in the first place. We need them to build and strengthen and sustain the American middle class, which is one of the greatest legacies of this nation. So, as we search for ways to adapt our fight to new times and new challenges, we must remember there is no one way to win the war on poverty President Johnson first declared 50 years ago. It's not a question of big or small government, of federal or local action. As President Johnson himself said, this will not be a short or easy struggle. No single weapon or strategy will suffice. Poverty, he said, is a national problem. But this attack, to be effective, must be organized at the state and local level. For the war on poverty, he said, will not be won in Washington. It must be won in the field, in every private home, in every public office, from the courthouse to the White House. This wasn't an ideological call for big centralized government control. It was an all-hands-on-deck call, a moral call for our nation to meet a national challenge. And although we've made progress since he first addressed this Congress in 1964, his call to combat poverty remains just as important today, even as our challenges have evolved. We've come a long way since the depths of our own Great Recession just a few years ago. More than 8 million private sector jobs have been created. There's been a more than 3-point drop in the national unemployment rate. We have resurgent energy, housing, and manufacturing sectors. Yet, although a few years have passed since our economy sunk to its lowest lows, this crisis remains for those Americans and their families who are still struggling to find a job, feed their families, and keep a roof over their heads. This week, while we're debating extending emergency unemployment insurance, we should note this is not only an obvious and necessary thing to do, it is the beginning of our real work of sustaining the war on poverty. I am proud to be engaged in bipartisan efforts to strengthen the middle class, to focus on jobs and skills and manufacturing. We have to find bipartisan solutions that engage the private and public sectors, federal and local governments, in putting our people back to work. And while we do that, we cannot forget to continue to insist on a circle of protection around the most vulnerable in our society, rather than allowing that valued circle to crumble. We have to remember that we're all in this together, that there, for the grace of God, go I, as we see those in our community, in our families, who are struggling in this recovery. We know that although today it may be our neighbors, tomorrow it may be us. President Johnson called on us to focus on the best of America, the spirit that we hold each other up, the spirit that builds community through mutual sacrifice. And as we begin our work in this new year to jumpstart our economy and spread hope and opportunity, we must never forget that basic spirit which President Johnson called forward and which has kept this country moving from generation to generation. Thank you. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Maryland.
Madam President, I rise today to speak on actually two topics. One on extending the unemployment benefit program that is so essential to the people of Maryland and to other fellow Americans, and also to comment on the National Security Agency surveillance programs, the need for reform of the program, but not the need to reject the mission of the agency and to cast a disparaging light on the men and women who work there. Let me start first, though, talking about unemployment benefits. I come here today with great sense of urgency and passion over the fact that we need to extend these unemployment benefits that expire January 1st. This is one of the coldest spells that we've had in decades in the Northeast Midwest area. And I find it unfathomable when it is so cold that the big chill in Washington is that we're not going to extend the unemployment benefits, than extending a warm, helping hand to Americans who have lost their job through no fault of their own and have been unemployed for more than 6 months. Where are our national priorities? If we can't help one another be a bridge to get to a job, then what is our government all about? We spend billions overseas, and I support that. We spend billions on tax breaks to send jobs overseas. I don't support that. And I want to make sure that for the men and women who don't have a job today but are looking for one every day, we help them out. Senator Coons, the gentleman from Delaware, just spoke and said, today it could be your neighbor, tomorrow it could be you. Well, I think we're going to be unemployed unless we don't start focusing on how to help the middle class. The middle class is shrinking and unemployment is stagnant. We've got to lower the unemployment rate. I want to make sure, though, that during this time, while we look at how to create jobs, we provide continue to provide a social insurance program that helps people when they're laid off through no fault of their own. My own home state of Maryland is now, right this very minute, affected by 23,000 people. That's 23,000 families that have now lost a modest benefit, which averages out to about $313 per week. That enables people that while they're looking for work to be able to pay for their housing, pay for their food, and pay for their heat. Now, there are those who are implying that if we provide unemployment compensation or assistance, that we're going to encourage sloth, laziness, laggardness, that they're going to kind of lounge around, not looking for work. Let me tell you the story about Western Maryland. And this isn't Barb Mikulski. This is reported in the Baltimore Sun and in the Washington Post. We have a community called Washington County. The unemployment rate is 7.3%. Just a few years ago, we had a Good Humor plant. They made ice cream. Now, I visited an ice cream plant. Everybody's happy there, and they were busy producing Good Humor that was sold all over this country. Well, 2 years ago, it closed. 400 good-paying jobs left Hagerstown. That's the bad news. The good news is a co-op dairy farmer came in, purchased it, and is now producing milk and ice cream, but in smaller amounts. Guess what? They received 1,600 job applicants for 36 openings. They had 36 openings and 1,600 people in a small rural county applied for those jobs. 44 people for every job available. Now, Hagerstown has a great sense of patriotism. They sent many men and women to fight and die in the 2 wars we've just fought. They have a great work ethic. They need to be able to have the opportunity for jobs. Don't tell those people in Hagerstown or in Salisbury or in Baltimore or throughout my state that they're too lazy. Maybe we're lazy. Maybe we don't get the job done, okay? One of the quickest ways to jumpstart the economy, if we want to, is to be able to pay unemployment compensation. All the data shows that unemployment insurance adds about $1.60 back into the economy. So, Madam President, I'm going to create a sense of urgency. And I say to my friends on the other side of the aisle, over a decade ago, you had a man run for the President of the United States who won. His name was George W. Bush. And he campaigned on something that I thought was so interesting. And maybe I look forward to actually hearing more about the way he was going. It was called compassionate conservative. We understand that people are conservative. We understand that people are fiscal conservative. But the message was we can be compassionate conservatives. So I say to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, remember the compassionate conservative ring of a decade ago. And remember that man's father who said we need to be points of light, to light up America. So I'm going to say, let's be a point of light here. Let's add a beacon of hope to the uninsured, and to the unemployed, and be able to help them out. And don't be critical of them if they can't find work. Let's look at us at how we can have a job strategy. Let's have an infrastructure bank that creates jobs in the construction industry. Let's eliminate those tax breaks that send jobs overseas and bring the jobs back home. Let's do the tax extenders that get people working again. Let's put people back to work. Pass the unemployment compensation. Let's pass some job creation bills. Let's get America working again. And the way we do it is we get to work and pass the unemployment compensation bill. Now, Madam President, I also want to comment on something else, which is the NSA, the National Security Agency, which I'm very familiar with as a member of the Intelligence Committee, and it's also in my state. I know the men and women who work there, and I know the mission that they provide. And I also know that a few months ago, a man by the name of Edward Snowden lit up the airwaves with his illegal barrage of revelations about the role of surveillance that the National Security Agency plays. Mr. Snowden provided a titillating, mesmerizing inside view of the United States. Whether he was a whistleblower or a traitor, I'll leave that for other discussion. Right now, the fact is that we know about NSA surveillance, and it sparked a lot of debate. I think that's good. I think that's healthy. I come here to the floor today to, first of all, thank President Obama for establishing a commission to look at this and make recommendations. My view is we ought to review the recommendations of the Presidential Commission. We need to make reform where reform is necessary, but let's not reject the mission of the National Security Agency that has protected us for decades and decades, and let us not reject the men and women who work there every single day, standing sentry to protect ourselves against attack, whether it's a terrorist attack or whether it is a cyber security attack. Yes, we need to protect the civil liberties of the United States of America, to honor our Constitution. My principles for reform, and as I looked at these programs as a member of the Intelligence Committee, has always been whatever we ask NSA to do, whatever we ask any member, any of the intelligence agencies should be. Is it constitutional? Is it legal? Is it authorized? And if it meets, and is it necessary? Remember the criteria, and I recommend that this be the grid of the prism we look at it. Constitutional? Absolutely. Legal? A necessity. Authorized? NSA doesn't do it on its own. The authorization comes from the President and his intelligence apparatus. And then last but not at all least, is it necessary to protect people? Now, I think we need to really work on this. President Obama established this review commission. I think it's great, and I think the Congress should review it. I know appropriate hearings are already doing that. At the same time, we should need to practice reform. I am absolutely on the side of reform. Joining with my colleagues, I support reform of these programs. For years, I led the fight on the accountability of leadership. Back in 2007, I wanted the head of the National Security Agency confirmed by the United States Senate. I was stiff-armed by the Congress. I was held back by the Armed Services Committee. The turf wars were out of the Pentagon. Don't meddle with our generals. Well, I wasn't meddling with the general. I just think that the head of the National Security Agency should be there. So let's get off of turf wars and fight terrorist wars, but restore confidence in the National Security Agency and have its head confirmed by the Senate. I'm a great admirer of General Alexander. The committee also recommends that the next head of NSA be a civilian. I think we ought to look at that. I think we ought to examine that and see what is in the best interest of the mission of the agency and what we need to be able to do. But whoever is the head of the National Security Agency, be they civilian or military, I think they ought to be confirmed by the United States Senate. I also joined across the aisle with my great colleague, Senator Coates of Indiana, to ask that the NSA Inspector General also be confirmed by the Senate to make sure that we have a confirmable position so there is a bona fide whistleblower route with a confirmable Inspector General that makes sure NSA is doing the right thing and whistleblowers have an avenue to do it. I've also supported transparency to make sure that those NSA programs are accountable and as transparent as they could be. That doesn't mean we reveal the secrets of the United States, but joining with Senators Wyden and Udall and Heydrich, I've introduced an amendment to make the secret FISA court opinions more publicly available under certain circumstances. I've also worked with Senators King and Warner and Collins to bring greater transparency to the FISA court through an amicus curiae or the friend of the court to assist in the consideration of novel interpretations of the law. There are those who say in the President's report there should be kind of like a civil liberties council, that red team's going there. Let's talk about it. Let's debate it. Let's make sure there's more than one opinion before the court when it's legality. So I support these. Now let's go to the constitutionality. One judge recently said the NSA surveillance program, particularly under something called Section 215, was shocking, and he said it wasn't constitutional. 36 other FISA court opinions by 15 judges said it was constitutional. Now, Madam President, I'm a social worker. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. You know who decides on what's constitutional? The Supreme Court of the United States. I think the Congress ought to call for, or the executive branch and the President, for an expedited review of these programs. I would like to settle once and for all, are the programs that have been laws passed by the Congress in the area of surveillance, are they constitutional? If they are, we know that. If they're not, that ends the program. We will follow the law and we will obey the Constitution of the United States. So let's get to work here. Let's go to work here. Let's make sure that we're bringing about reform. I want to talk, though, about the mission of the agency. The National Security Agency is not a puzzle palace. And it's not some sneaky surveillance agency with people in tan raincoats and fedoras hiding behind doors, spying on people. And in fact, remember what they think they do. They think what they do is constitutional, legal, authorized, and necessary. We need the National Security Agency. This 215 program is only one thing that they do. They're to protect us against counterterrorism. They're to protect us against counter-espionage. They're there to protect us by the work that they do to make sure weapons of to be advocates for non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction through what they work with, cooperating with the CIA and the NRO. They also protect us in the area of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, as we all know, those 40 million people recently that had their credit cards stolen at Target, well, we don't know if that was a job done in the United States of America. For all we know, it was organized cyber crime coming out of Albania or another Eastern European country with, shoddy rules and regs. We don't know that. But we do know The FBI is working on it, the NSA is working on it, and others appropriately. NSA's job is to look at what is over there. But, you know, some of our biggest bank heists and organized cyber crime is coming from over there. Did you know that one of the biggest thefts out of the Medicare program was done on a cyber heist out of organized crime out of Albania? Can you believe that? But it was caught. Working with the Inspector General at CMS, the FBI, and what we did over there with NSA, we caught them, we got our money back, and we're back on track. So they do a good job, and we're kind of losing sight on these concerns about surveillance. There is no doubt that we protect the civil liberties of the United States of America. We do believe in the privacy. I'm not going to describe the program or go into it, but I'll tell you what really bothers me. What really bothers me is that somehow or another, through the media and even conversations in this body, that we are painting NSA as if it were a bad, villainous, duplicitous, surreptitious agency. That could be further from the truth. And somehow or another, the men and women who work there every single day, standing sentry in behalf of the United States of America on signals intelligence, or somehow or another to feel that something's wrong. The morale at that agency is terrible. The morale at that agency is falling. The morale at that agency is not in a healthy situation. Now, we've got to do something about that by showing respect for the men and women who work there. Most of them are civilians. They're some of the brightest people in the world. Did you know that the NSA is the largest employer of mathematicians in the world because of the code breakers, the cryptologists? They break codes. Who uses codes? It's not Mother Teresa. Respect. Let's have respect because they're at it. You know, while the rest of us were home for Christmas, enjoying turkey or home at Thanksgiving, they were out there working. They were making sure that there wasn't another underwear bomber. They were out there making sure there wasn't, when our defenses appear to be lowest, with people traveling on airplanes, with people in a holiday spirit, how they were to practice. They're working right now to make sure that our Olympic athletes are safe, working with appropriate international law enforcement. They're at it every single day. Can't we give them respect while we sort out constitutionality and legality? Let's sort it out, but let's stop the finger pointing. I must tell you, Madam President, I was taken back today when I got my National Journal Daily, where it says Obama invites NSA top congressional critics to meet. Now, I think it's always great when the president talks with the Congress, but he invited the critics of the program to the White House. I think that's good. I would have preferred, though, to read, instead of inviting the critics, the phrase would have said reformers. Put me in the reformer category. If there are abuses, I'm one of the first to criticize it. I've been part of reform. I intend to be part of reform. But I don't intend to be part of rejecting the mission, and I don't intend to be part of any effort that downgrades or downplays the contribution of the men who work there. So call the people reformers, and I would hope that the White House and this Congress would signal to the men and women at the National Security Agency that they are respected, that they are valued, and as we pursue reform, we will always do our duty, that what they do is constitutional, legal, authorized, and necessary, but don't blame them for the job we ask them to do. And, Madam President, I think if we proceed with the spirit of reform rather than blame, we can really be able to accomplish a great deal here. So, Madam President, This is a big day that's going on here. Let's pass unemployment compensation. Let's do the reforms we need to, but and let's do the job we're supposed to. I yield the floor.
The senator from Washington.
Thank you, Madam President. I come to the floor this afternoon to talk about the fact that 50 years ago today, President Lyndon Johnson made his